Welcome back to Divulgence, everybody. Today I am joined by author Janet Merran, who has written the book Top 40 Honeypot. Thank you so much, Janet, for being here. How are you today?
I'm great, and thanks for having me.
Oh, well, it's a pleasure. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And we'll get the ball started with that.
Well, just about myself. I did work in radio, that I did mention that to you, Jordan. But about my academic credentials, I earned my master's degree in 2007 as an adult learner at the University of Minnesota and a graduate level certificate in innovation studies. And I wrote my master's thesis on creating personal capital and alternative futures through a virtual self, which is a long way of explaining what we're doing right here. We are virtual people. We're not in real life, and we're creating capital and learning about. And when I was studying this, it was about 20 years ago now. It was ahead of my time. And I currently live with my husband of over 40 years. We're near our adult children and their families, and I'm a writer and an artist. I make beaded jewelry, and we have a large organic garden, which I enjoy cooking from.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's,
so you're
that's a little about myself.
Pretty self-sufficient then.
Well, not completely, but we have apple trees. I have make lots of apple juice and lots of tomato sauce.
Oh, nice. Yeah, my mother likes to make tomato sauce herself, and salsas and pestos and stuff like that. So
great.
So your book, Top 40 Honeypot. Can you just start by telling us what your book is about, and then can you maybe get into the research process for the book?
Well, in the year 1974, my main character, Donnie Dixon, is hired as the program director of one of the most popular top 40 radio stations in the country. But behind the excitement of the music, the contests, and the big money prizes is a dark world of crime and deceit. It isn't a true crime story, but it has elements of true crime. And my tagline is, "It didn't start with Diddy." So I was an insider in Top 40 Radio in the 70s. I worked in radio for a few years, and I did experience the culture and many of these seamier practices firsthand. The story's fictional, but it's based on a real era, a real industry, and the culture, and this is my first novel. I do have some other published work, but this is my first novel. As for research, well, kind of jumping ahead of my thoughts, but a lot of the research came from my own experience, but I spent, at least 5 years doing research. I was up late many nights looking through search engines, trying to find information about some of these long lost people. Well, they weren't long lost, but they were to me. So the story is fictionalized, but it is based on a real time, real era, and real people. So most of these DJs, we don't think of DJs as being major celebrities, but in their own way, they have some celebrity, and they were all very well known in their own communities. And most of them, whether you call it hubris or not, have a lot of information that they actually put themselves online. So I spent many, many late evenings poring over old copies, which are thankfully all on Google, old copies of Billboard, old copies of the other record magazines. Radio and Records is the name of one of them. Looking at the websites, looking for the people. And one particular DJ, I was so mystified. I couldn't find anything about him. What happened to this guy? Where'd he go? Did he stay in radio? Did he go to something else? Well, after, I'm serious, years of looking, I finally put in the right research terms, and up popped a book, which I got from interlibrary loan because the one copy of the book was in California. So I had it delivered to my home and far away from there. And I found a whole chapter about this particular guy. And I had so thrilled I finally had cracked it. And it ended up being one line in the book.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
How much time did you spend in the radio business?
It was about 2.5 years, and I was very young. This is really a retrospective of 50 years later. So all this stuff did happen in real time in the 70s. And one thing about the book, when you read it, I don't have chapter names, but I just have chapter numbers. I think I have 36 chapters. Each chapter starts with the song of the week, which I carefully researched from the Billboard charts. And the idea was for the readers, if they were not familiar with the song, they could just, pop it up on YouTube and listen to it for a few minutes. Or if they do remember it, they'll start humming that song. The idea was to bring the reader without me actually being there and showing my pictures and, playing songs for them. So the reader could imagine what the times were like by listening to those songs and bringing back those memories.
And honestly, Janet, I wanted to make sure to tell you that I thought that was so great for you to do, because it's just like, essentially, if you're watching a movie or TV or something, and it's like a timepiece, especially, obviously they're going to pull songs from that timepiece, get you in that mood, get you in that mind space of being back in the day, whenever that might be. So that was a really smart and very creative thing to add for your book.
Thank you.
I think people who read it will really enjoy that aspect of it for sure. So props to you. What's the meaning of the title? Top 40 Honey.
The word honeypot can have a number of meanings, but I couldn't call it top 40 blank. And by that, I meant female, you know what. Remember, I'm old. I don't say curse words. I don't, but that's what it's referring to. That's what it's referring to. The word honeypot is actually used oftentimes for a woman who it would be like a spy, for example, who is is used to trick, the unwitting victim into compromise, or I forget, there's other words for it. And that was actually described in the book, that this character, the Jackie character, was used to provide information and like basically blackmail information for political people. So it is used in that way. There's other ways of using the word, but that's the way it was intended.
Okay, so like a honeypot operation, like Jeffrey Epstein is a great example, right?
Well, yes and no. I was the Epstein. I don't know if those girls' films were used to
right. We still don't know.
We don't know about that, but that is shown in James Bond movies and lots of fiction. So I compare my book more to fiction than real life stories because it is fiction.
Right. So it's based on some truth, fictionalized.
Exactly.
So it might be obvious, but can you just explain to us why you decided to make it fiction and, change, all the names and everything like that? I mean, again, I'm sure there's obvious reasons, but if you could just step us through that.
Why was it fictionalized? Well, because I don't know everything that happened back then. I mean, I was just a player. So, I had a small part and I interviewed lots of women. My main character is amalgam of at least 5 different women I interviewed, ranging from very high level vice president from a huge radio chain at the time, all the way down to secretaries. And in particular, there's one DJ, well, former DJ that I interviewed that was spitting angry still years later at what had happened to her by actually one of the men I characterized. It was, 10 or 15 years after the time of my book. But these are things that have been going on for a long time and haven't really ended. So hopefully that answered that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another thing that you've mentioned, you sent me some materials. You talk about Easter eggs in your book, and I mean, I love Easter eggs in movies and video games and all sorts of things. Can you talk a little bit about that, or is it better to get
No,
into...
it's okay. I had someone ask me about, I used a room number. I can't even remember what it is now. It's the name of a Stanley Kubrick movie about The Shining, but it's a documentary. Yeah, that's it. 237. I just threw that in for fun. And the gentleman there you go. The gentleman that asked me about it is like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I just threw it in as an Easter egg. But
that's a good one.
Yeah, but remember, I am from that era, and I truly must say that one of my favorite musicians from the time and still up to the present day was and still is Todd Rundgren. So I did have my character Jackie. Her favorite musician was Todd Rundgren. So I put in some clues. Todd Rundgren's wife's name is Michelle, so I had a character named Michelle. One of his associates is a woman named Mary Lou Arnold, but I just changed it to Lou Arnold. The Todd Rundgren fan club always has a little joke because for many years people didn't really even know who he was because he was really more of a producer than, a big star on his own. And the joke was Todd who? You'd say, oh, I love Todd Rundgren. And people would say, Todd who? And of course, I put that in the book. One of Todd Rundgren's song is called Marlene. It was Marlene, Marlene. She's the prettiest girl I've ever seen. And One of my characters is named Marlene. So that's what I just did, just for the fun of it. So those are examples of the Easter eggs.
It makes the reading fun, but I'm sure it also makes the writing fun.
Yeah, of course.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Well, one thing I do want to talk about is how big Top 40 radio was in those days. It's hard for people today to understand because at the click of our fingers, we have access to not even hundreds of thousands, millions of streams of music, of artists, of TV shows, of films, new ones, old ones, everything we want. In the 70s, there wasn't a choice like that. I mean, Of course, you had the radio stations, and there was the talk station, the news station, the sports station, the religious station, etc. But Top 40 was it. It was as they say, the king of the dial. And the best thing about it, it was free.
Right.
Yeah, it was free. You didn't have to pay to hear your favorite songs. So what I want to say about radio was every market or geographic area had more than one Top 40 radio station.
Okay.
Large markets like New York, Chicago, Los Angeles had a number of stations that were really widely known and very popular. And they all had a very carefully researched sound. And that's what my book talks about a lot, how important the research was and manipulation of the playlist to get people to to listen the longest amount time as possible. And that's actually part of the plot. So the on-air talent, they were called the boss jocks. And it was primarily men. Maybe 10 years later, women started to get into radio. In a few of the radio stations, like I know in San Francisco, they had underground stations that played whole albums, and they had a few women DJs, but it was definitely a male-centric, male-dominated field. And the boss jocks all had their unique sound, and they had their unique names, and the radio stations had logos that were audio logos. They actually hired musicians, and they had these cute little quick logos. You don't want me to start singing, but where, a bunch of singers would say the call letters of the radio station, and
Right.
Everything was very fun and fast paced and exciting. They were known for their patter, and they had crazy sound effects, and all the boss jocks had unique styles. There was one really well-known boss jock that you would recognize their name today. His name was Casey Kasem. And the reason you would probably recognize his name was because he had a countdown. It was called American Top 40, and it went on all the way up till maybe about 15 years ago into about 2010. So a lot of these stations were chains, and there were so many radio stations in the United States that I had to make up different names for the stations. I couldn't think of like fake call letters. Yeah, there's Casey Kasem. Because call letters, almost everything has been used already. So that's why I called my two stations Beach City Top 40 and Midwest Music FM. And then if you don't know about that, all the stations east of the Mississippi began with a W, and all the stations west of the Mississippi began with a K. So, okay. Go ahead.
No. Keep going.
Okay. So, like I was saying, radio stations in the 70s lived and died by their rating score. And it was done by a company called Arbitron that actually sent paper diaries, if you can imagine, to people's homes that I don't know how they decided who was going to fill these out, but there was some way that Arbitron did this. And the company's still in business. It's called Nielsen Audio Ratings today. And then people would write in their paper diary, I listened to this station. I listened to Midwest Music FM from 10 o'clock to 10:25 while I was, doing my laundry, for example. And then I listened again from 5 to 5:20 while I was cooking dinner. So that would be, say, the typical housewife writing when she listened to the radio. And like I said, these stations base their rates, their advertising rates, on how they, came in as a top number, like number one, number two, number three in the market. And of course, the ones that got a higher rating could charge more for their advertising rates. So it was, a little bit different than the way we base radios, music now. Now, many times, unless you're listening to free radio stations over the air, you're paying for your music, or you're paying by listening to commercials. So this whole idea of Arbitron ratings being tweaked by this important research company, which I call WKR Research. It's an important plot point in the book. And this was actually based on a real research company with real owners of this WKR Research who had actually been top executives at radio stations before they moved into research. And I didn't write this down and tell you about it, but I actually did go into the offices of what I call WKR Research, and they had, wait for this, computers. And these computers were the size of an entire room. They were gigantic. You have to remember, this was 1975, 76.
Okay.
And how did they communicate? Well, the radio stations had a phone line, and they put the phone into some kind of a holster, and I don't know exactly how it worked. I'm sure one of your friends that knows about the history of computers could explain it to you better. Yeah. But they actually could get data, which they printed off into this famous document, which they called, and I also called the book, to determine how to do their research. And these top 40 radio stations spent thousands of dollars on contests, and they spent so much. Yeah.
Yeah. That I remember. I mean, I am younger, but I do. I mean, they still do it. They still do it today, right? But I feel like that was a really big thing back in the day. winning
absolutely.
to a concert.
Concert tickets, promotional items, money contests, which, I mean, our stations that we worked at, they gave away $10,000, which is considered a fortune back. That would be like giving away $100,000 today.
Something like
and
that.
Of course, some of the things that we don't know about is some of the prizes that the stations got, they were just given, it was all favors back and forth. So another thing that these radio station had, which I call them the hit sheets. It's hard to understand if you haven't seen these, but they were actual little cards that had the top hits of the week, and they were delivered to record stores and other places where young people would congregate and buy records. So they might have been delivered. I don't know if you can even imagine they would sell records in department stores and other places, which we never think they would sell records. You probably never heard of, Ben Franklin, but like a 5 and 10. Oh, you have a 5 and 10 store. So besides just record stores, variety stores, we don't really have those anymore. Things are a lot different. And the hit sheets, they were very colorful. They had pop art decorations and illustrations, and they had lots of pictures of the DJs. And as I described, my character, Jackie, like myself, I took pictures for one of the radio stations. The other station I worked at, they didn't have a budget for that. This station was so big that they actually had their own print shop, and they had an employee whose only job was printing what I call the hit sheets. And then at the end of the week or whatever day it was, he'd load them up onto the van and go around to 50 places and deliver them. This was a full-time job for someone.
Wow,
I don't know what happened to him when it went out of style. Not only that, was something else that I describe in my book is I called it the Rock Concert Times. There were little newspapers and magazines, same thing. Oh, I forgot to mention the other place where people would get all this stuff was, I don't know if you remember these, head shops. You know what that is?
Like
what?
Like head shops, like to buy smoking paraphernalia.
Right. Yeah, all that stuff and T-shirts and posters and yeah, those were very popular in the 70s. And as a matter of fact, one of the contests, which I didn't write about in the book, it took place in one of those head shops.
Okay.
So there was a lot that was going on and a lot that I remembered and some things I didn't. So I couldn't put every single thing in the story. But in these tabloids, which the one I called the Rock Concert Times, there'd be concert reviews, interviews, music news, pictures of the stars, or the musicians. And they were given away free in all these different places. And they were really important. The promotions, contests, and commercials, they were the lifeblood of radio stations in the 70s. And the disc jockeys produced the local commercials. So they would add what's called taglines. So there were a lot of commercials. I always remember the Blue Jean commercials or commercials for shampoo or auto sales. I don't know if you saw this movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Yeah.
I love that movie.
That's a great one.
Yeah, and there was, I think, a commercial for Clairol. I don't know if you remember that part. Some shampoo that was targeted to young ladies. I heard that commercial and it brought back all the memories. Oh my gosh. So what they would do is the DJs would either have to make the commercials in the studio or they would get the commercial made because it was, say, a national jeans company, so-and-so blue jean company. And then they would add at the end of it, and you can buy this, blue jeans, available now at such and such a store in whatever neighborhood it was. So that's one of the things that the DJs did. So this book, my book, Top 40 Honeypot, it describes many of the promotions and the contests of the radio stations. And it describes a charity walk that featured the DJs walking for a cause, which was actually, that was an honest contest, not a dirty contest, because that's what I do describe in the book. Some of these, quote, dirty contests, meaning that the person that won the prize was picked in advance.
Okay, so that's essentially the difference between a dirty contest and a
clean contest, for example. But I just want to mention two of the contests, and I call one of them the see-through safe. And that's not what it was called, but I had to change it, obviously. And in real life, this was a real contest in '75, and I called it the see-through safe contest. And the station had a plexiglass safe made, filled it up with money, had, guards watching it at a local shopping center. And of course, the idea was the public, the person to win, they had to guess the combination of the safe to call in and win. And to be perfectly honest, I don't remember how all those contests worked, but it was kind of the same idea. Guess the right numbers, call in to win. Well, I was so shocked. 5 years later, I was watching TV and saw there was a movie called How to Beat the High Cost of Living. And it was a real movie. It starred Susan St. James, Jane Curtin, if you remember, was from the original Saturday Night Live, Jessica Lange, Richard Benjamin, and Eddie Albert. And the idea is these three suburban housewives were down on their luck, needed extra money, and there was a contest at a shopping center with a big plastic ball filled with money. So, I was looking at that and like, oh my gosh, that's where they got our idea from, our see-through safe contest, which I said it was called something else back then. And I personally was the person who called around to different plexiglass manufacturers to see who could make a safe for us. So this was done completely out of the imagination of the people working at the radio station. And then there was one other really big contest, which I called the best contest. That's not what it was called in real life. And it was so popular that it was actually licensed and done all over the country. And the idea was there were 100, quote, fabulous prizes that they were very seductively, if you can imagine that, promoted over the air to give the impression that if you won the contest, you were going to win all 100 prizes.
Oh.
People were a lot more gullible in the 70s.
Sure, I could just imagine. I could, especially with like different kinds of marketing like that is just well known now, like contests and stuff. Now we know, okay, we got to read the fine print, and now we know, okay, well, this word and this phrase may not necessarily mean what they're saying. But yeah, I could imagine maybe back then they take stuff a lot more literal and at face value, right?
Yeah. So obviously the answer is there was only one prize, and it was a good prize, but you don't get 100 prizes.
Sure.
So at the time when it was time to call in and win, the whole phone system of that entire area went down. That's how many people were trying to call in and win. So anyway, that's a little about what radio was like in the 70s. Quite a lot different than the way things are today. But, if you turn on the radio now, which I just did recently, these are kind of the same, really. It's still, the idea is to generate the excitement, and there are still contests, and there's still musical interludes that are the station call letters and other fun little things on the radio. So you can see, even though it's been 50, 60 years since the beginning all of this, it's still in effect today in a different way, but it's still very similar.
Let's get into some of the characters in your book and kind of in your journey, so to speak. quick question though. Did the during your time in radio, the DJs at your station, were they pretty popular? Were they kind of like a celebrity status, or what was
Oh,
that like?
absolutely. Yeah, they were very well known in the community. There was one in particular, well, a few of the DJs stayed in that business for their whole careers. A few of them just used it as a stepping stone and decided to do something else later in their life. One of them in particular, who I tried to paint in a very nice light, because even though a lot of dirty stuff, illegal stuff, criminal stuff was going on, I don't think he was. I'm quite sure. I know 100% he was not involved in any of it. He's a good guy through and through. He's still to this day known as a very famous, lovable DJ, and he devoted thousands of hours for a children's charity or a charity of some type. So, like you were saying, that some of them, they were minor celebrities in their communities, and whenever there was an occasion or a contest, the DJs all, they took turns coming out to meet the public and show up. There were a lot of times what they called remotes. I don't know if that's done so much anymore, but where the whole radio station would set up at a remote location, and the DJ, for example, when there was a contest at a shopping center, they would set up a remote at the shopping center and broadcast. The music was still at the station, but the talking part was at the remote area. Right. Wherever it was, like I said, usually a shopping center. And then there would be always a huge crowd of people. These DJs were really popular, and most of them were pretty good guys too. So my joke about this book is that all of the DJs, they had fake names. They had DJ names. And a lot of the names were very similar to each other. So I had to think of fake names for the fake names. So that was kind of a fun thing for me to do. And I would go back and do research. Okay, what were popular names in the years that so-and-so would have been born, and to try to make it, as authentic as I could. And one of the characters I did call, she wasn't a DJ, she was the music director of the top 40 radio chain. And I called her Elizabeth Corley. And I remember saying to my daughter, I named my character Elizabeth, and she says, "Isn't that a very current name?" And I'm like, Queen Elizabeth I? No, it's a very popular name for hundreds of years. So, but in other words, some of the names, for example, Jordan, there wouldn't have been Jordans on the radio in the 70s. It just wasn't a popular name back then. So no, nothing to do with you personally. I'm just saying that there are names in different eras that were more popular. So one thing I had to do when I did write about this character, Elizabeth Corley, she was based on a real woman. And she was, as I said, the national music director for what I called the Harkins radio chain. And that, knowing about her and researching her and her career, is where I got the idea to bring in the idea of the occult rituals. This particular person, she worked in radio and actually left radio not that much longer after I left radio, and actually worked for a major movie company in California, which I'm not going to name. After she retired, she wrote 3 books about witchcraft, a 3-book series. So as you know, for anyone who's looked at the dark side of media, this really is no surprise. And you might wonder, like, how did this nice lady, myself, how did I learn about the occult? Well, I took an online class. How else would I have learned about it? I really did.
Really? Okay. Well, yeah, we talk about the occult and crazy stuff on this show all the time. So, yeah, let's jump into that stuff for sure. Tell us about that. And what was your class like, first of all?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you want me to say the name of the person, but he's pretty well known. I will mention his name. His name's Gordon White. Okay, so you're familiar with Gordon. And I'm not a member of his group at this point, but I was for a couple of years, and I learned quite a lot about things that I didn't know anything about before. And of course, there are a lot of books and movies and so forth where you can learn enough about, I didn't need to get completely seeped in everything, but I needed to know enough to be able to write my scenes. So it was an interesting experience. And one person that I interviewed, I don't know if I've mentioned this to anyone, who actually worked in law enforcement in Los Angeles area, I had mentioned to him, did you ever look into any of these crimes against women? And what he said to me was, there were so many murders that they didn't have any time to look into anything else. So I don't really want to get into that till the end, till we talk about maybe some of the dark side of things that were going on in California in the 70s. But you were asking me about research for Top 40 Honeypot, and I just want to mention that I did use a male editor because the book is written in the voice of a man. It's not written from a woman's viewpoint, which was actually pretty easy for me. But I did have a male editor who helped me toughen up some of the dialogue, because what an editor does, he rewrites things, and I really appreciate the good work he did, and he really grasped the idea of the story and helped me, like I said, toughen up the voice of my main character, Donnie Dixon. He also helped me quite a lot with Elizabeth Corley and make her a lot meaner than I originally wrote. So, that's one thing about writing. You have to make your characters fit to the story. And I did find quite a lot of information on YouTube. The radio stations that I worked at, there were so many YouTubes, and the disc jockeys. So it really was a big help. All of the media that we have today, besides being able to look at the old issues of Radio and Records and Billboard and some of those other things, it was a great help that I could use YouTube to help me recreate some of these people and some of the times. There was one YouTube I found that was of the radio station when I was there. And I do remember running in to wish one of the DJs, I mean, it was not just me, everybody in the whole office ran in to wish him happy birthday. And somehow or another that was recorded on a YouTube, and I recognized my voice. I don't know about you, but when I hear my voice, I always recognize it. And I remember I was there. I remember wishing the DJ, we were all yelling happy birthday. And like I said, I didn't write everything in the book, but the big joke was that somebody had a pie filled with whipped cream and smashed it in the DJ's face as we were all wishing him a happy birthday. There was a lot of fun stuff going on in the radio business back then. And that's the whole thing, that I want to show the two sides, the fun and then the secret dirty side. And I wanted it to be a contrast going back and forth, so people wouldn't think it was one thing or the other. So like I said, there was back issues of Billboard, and there was a trade journal from those times called Radio and Records. It was a trade journal for the radio and the music industry. And I had no idea at the time. I knew there was a man whose name was Bob Wilson, who was the editor, the owner of the company. And I did find out later at doing research that wasn't his real name. That was his radio name too. But he had a partner, Robert Kardashian, like that Kardashian. Oh. Yes. The lawyer Kardashian, when he was alive. And he was the now deceased father of the famous Kardashian family. And issues of Radio and Records are archived online. And if you look in Wikipedia, you will see it's right there. I don't know how involved he was. He might have just been a financial backer. But when I found out about that, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, that's it. Sure.
And there was another important trade journal at the time. It was called the Friday Morning Quarterback, and it was founded by the late Cal Rudman in 1968. And read by thousands of industry professionals. And of course, everything now is online. When I did some promotion for my book, I sent out information to a lot of online publications about radio, and I did get some press from a few of them. And like I was saying before, I found updates on almost all of the DJs I knew from the 70s. And the hardest part was trying to find women from that time, especially who were willing to talk about what had happened. One particular lady, I did find her and have trouble. I didn't have any trouble finding about anything about her, but she wasn't going to say anything about radio.
Yeah.
You know, some of these things you just don't want to talk about after they're over.
Yeah.
And one thing about the occult that I want to mention that actually I fictionalized in the book, and it is something that happened in real life. In the book, I talk about the photograph of the Jackie character being used in an occult ceremony and being put inside a frame, and then the woman who was the witch or the mistress of ceremonies smashing the frame with like a small hammer of sorts, which, you know, was pretty dark thing to write about. Well, this actually happened in real life. I didn't see that part of it, but I went to visit one of the DJs and his wife at their home. I mean, you have to understand, we were all social friends. It was, you know, as far as I knew back then, one big happy family. And I went to their home and I looked on the etagere, which at that point you probably wouldn't even remember, but it had all the record equipment and his records and all the, you know, the tuner and on the very top was a picture of me in a frame. And I was like, that's weird. This is a married couple. Why would my picture be in their home in a frame? So I reached up to grab it and looked at it, and the glass was smashed on the top of the picture. And the woman, the wife of the DJ, grabbed it and ran away. And I have to admit, I was extremely naive to anything like that at that time in my life. I was only 22 years old. What would I know about something like that? And of course, I found out years later, you know, what it was, what it meant. And on the cover of one of the 3-part books, the 3-series books written by the woman that I mentioned before, was that exact type of picture, a picture in a frame with the glass smashed. So it's not as far-fetched as you would think.
No, not at all.
So crazy stories, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Is there any more that you want to touch on with the occult, or
well, yes and no. I do want to mention a little bit about radio and the Mafia.
Okay, yeah,
you want to get into that?
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to hear about that.
I didn't write this book to be about the Mafia. As a matter of fact, I never even used that word. I just talked about the organization. And I did watch the entire series. I watched all of The Sopranos.
Okay.
And there was a few scenes in there that kind of connected. We'll just call it transnational organized crime to radio. People don't really understand how big the Italian Mafia was in that era, because in the early 80s, Edwin Meese, who was the attorney general at the time, kind of smashed everything. And at that point, the Mafia had their fingers in every business, everything, and was all over the United States. Well, the Italian Mafia was disbanded and smashed to a certain extent. But I mean, I didn't write about this in the book, but sadly, when one group of organized crime ends, then all sorts of others come in to fill up the vacuum.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
So one of the chapters I did write about Las Vegas, and it's clearly about the Mafia. And one of the books in my bibliography is Me, the Mob, and the Music, One Hell of a Ride with Tommy James and the Shondells, which was a popular group from the 1960s, which was actually before the time of Top 40 Honeypot. But this book explains the relationship of the mobsters to the band and the owner of their record label, whose name was Morris Levy, who was associated with the mob. And coincidentally, obviously this wasn't in the book, they finally did try and arrest Morris Levy and sentence him to prison. And he died of a heart attack the day before he was going to go in and serve his time. And then there was another book, which is very well known to some people in the music business, by Frederick Dannon, called Hitmen. And Hitmen, not meaning Mafia, but Hitmen meaning the guys that made the hits.
Sure.
It's, a double entendre. It describes the relationship of the mob in the music industry to a little bit. And like I said, so does The Sopranos. And I'm going to mention Hitman again a little bit later, because that was one of the books that the series Vinyl, the HBO series Vinyl, which was about not a record company, not a radio company at the time, but that was one of the books that was used very much for the research for that HBO series. And another example was, and at the time I didn't make a screen grab and I can't find it anymore, but there was an obituary for one of the men who was a station owner at the time, and I knew him, and I do have him portrayed in my book. And it mentioned in his obituary that his father was an accountant for the mob. Like I said, I don't have any proof of it because, nothing is forever on the internet. I don't know why I didn't do a screen grab of that. I can't find it anymore. But that really stuck in my mind. And I remember when I was reading it, that makes a lot of sense, because that particular gentleman was extremely young when he bought that radio station. Like, where would he get all that money? I mean, radio stations are really expensive. They still are to this day.
You're right.
And then another thing that I found out is that DJs were asked, and I did write about this, to make seemingly innocuous announcements over the radio, which were actually secretly coded messages. So I asked a friend of mine who was a DJ about this, and he was so naive. He goes, yeah, we were sending shout outs to the, secret shout outs to the girls we were trying to have dates with later. And I'm like, that's not what I'm talking about.
No, not at all.
I just couldn't figure out, like, why didn't they just go to a payphone? Remember those things, payphones? Why didn't they go to a payphone and call up, whoever and say, the meatballs will be ready today, or the spaghetti's not going to have meatballs, or, just make up some story. And then it dawned on me, it took a little while to figure this out. They were putting the messages out on the radio because the person who was supposed to get the message, that was all anonymous. It was all secret. So I don't know if you're familiar with The Americans, the TV show, The Americans.
Yes, I remember that.
It has to do with spycraft, Russian spycraft in the United States. I'm like, that sounds like The Americans, doesn't it? I mean, it had nothing to do with radio, but there's a lot of, fictional series that you can find a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it all ended up in my book. So do you have any more questions, or shall I just keep going? Give me some time to talk now.
What was I going to ask? Before you continue, okay. There was another question. Did you, because I feel like back in those days, it was more common to have musicians coming into the stations. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I actually described that. I had in the first part of the book, because it's divided into two parts. The first part at Beach City Top 40, the second part at Midwest Music FM. I have the whole scene where the Beach Boys come to visit the radio station. And, it was based on something that really happened. I don't remember everything. You have to understand, I wrote this decades after it really happened, but I do remember it. almost caused a mini riot in the parking lot. I mean, when the listeners got word that, they were listening, this was live on the air, and the Beach Boys were there to promote an album and promote an upcoming concert. And of course, Beach City Top 40, I don't specifically say exactly where it is, but you can figure out it was in Southern California.
Sure.
And for the Beach Boys were just like royalty in Southern California, of course. And the true part was when people started, the public were listening, they popped in their cars and they came to the radio station and they were all in the parking lot. I mean, not exactly banging on the doors, but they wanted to meet the Beach Boys. So it was really fun, actually. And I do describe in a very quick way at Midwest Music FM, which would be just an undefined place in the Midwest of the United States. The band Heart came to the radio station.
Oh, I love Heart.
Yeah, well, that was before they really had hit it big. They were just promoting their
that's so cool.
Yeah, that's then Cheech and Chong came to the radio station. Yeah, and nice. I did write about that a little bit. I actually, for real, took pictures of Cheech and Chong. I have those pictures to this day. Some of the people that were in the picture are deceased now, that they worked at the radio station. The guys were really funny. And it was just an on-air interview, but their records could never be played on the radio.
Right. Yeah.
They were called party records, and they were way too X-rated to ever be on the radio. Oh, it's a funny thing, and I didn't tell you about this. When I wrote the book and I had my editor, he kept putting in F-bombs and curse words. And I'm like, no, you have to take those out. That's not the way people talked in the 70s, especially in radio. Why? And there's a couple places where a character gets really mad. And I do have that in there. But DJs could not be used to using those words, because if it accidentally slipped out on the air, the station could lose their license. So it was a really big deal. So people didn't talk that way. And I had to keep, no, don't put this in the story, because that's not the way they talked. So
that's an interesting piece there. Yeah, I would think that it would be the opposite. But yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess that when you get into like shock jock territory, it gets a little different then, right?
Well, that was a lot later.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you, like, when did the whole shock jock thing kind of start? Was that like in the 80s?
Well, when you think of shock jock, you think of Howard Stern.
Yeah.
Right. And it was really interesting because Howard Stern was not on the radio everywhere in the United States, but for a short time, well after I left radio, after I was married and a young mom, we were living on the East Coast for a couple of years, and I could listen to Howard Stern because it was on the radio there. And one of the DJs that I knew from back in the day was one of his guests at one point. But I didn't find out about it till later, because I was, if I had known about it then, I would definitely called in.
Yeah.
But the shock jock era, I mean, I don't know exactly, but didn't start until at least the mid 80s or early 90s. So whenever Howard Stern, he would be the first one, the really well-known one. Yeah. So that was after all of this. It was after, the ascendancy, the rise and fall of Top 40 Radio.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Those are my questions. So you can, is there anything else that you want to talk about with the Mafia, or did you want to get into next subject?
Well, I can't leave without talking about sexism and rape jokes in the music industry. I mean, things were a lot different back then. And like I said, the tagline of my book is, it didn't start with Diddy. And sadly, it's really true. And I just want to mention, because I did talk about Cheech and Chong before, their fifth album was called Sleeping Beauty. And for those of you who don't know, a Sleeping Beauty refers to acecobarbital, which is a barbiturate. And it was widely used in the 60s and 70s. They called them Reds. because they were little red pills.
Okay.
And
okay.
it was used in the 60s and 70s to drug and assault women. And it was a big joke. It was so hilarious. And the original album cover of Sleeping Beauty, because that's what these pills were called. They were called Sleeping Beauties because they put the girl to sleep, right? It was a picture of a woman's tongue with a red, the pill on the edge of her tongue. And this joke, it was used very commonly in their albums and films. And then, you know, like I said, they did come to the radio station and, you know, nobody ever really talked about it. But this is another thing that's really weird. I'm going to talk about Bill Cosby, you know, because so this was way before Epstein and all of that. He had a 1969 comedy album called It's True, It's True. And he came out and he was doing a very, that's it. The Sleeping Beauty with the picture of the tongue and everything. Yep, that's it. So he had this album with a very creepy sounding bit called Spanish Fly. It's a comedy bit. He talks about using an aphrodisiac called Spanish Fly to drug and assault women. Of course, we all know since then, you know, what's happened with Bill Cosby. But the really strange part is that I discovered in my research, and I had mentioned that there's YouTube recordings of the station I worked at in 1976. And in one recording on YouTube, DJ number one asked DJ number two a question. And after he got an answer, the DJ number one said, "It's true. It's true." I mean, there's a recording of this on YouTube. And this obviously was an inside joke about these guys and what was going on. It was just an accepted part of the culture of the time. So I'll just say a little bit about, because you did mention, you know, Mayhem, that I am not, you know, a serious, intense researcher of all of these things I'm going to talk about or just mention, but the listener can take their time and look into the murders and cults in the 60s and 70s. Like I said, I'm not going to go into details about this topic. I'm just going to present examples. These are the backdrop to Top 40 Honeypot. The Altamont killing in December 69, Charles Manson, the Manson murders, Anton LaVey, the Church of Satan, Bohemian Grove, which was high-level secret society gatherings, which that had been going on for years, actually. A cult called the Process Church, MK Ultra, MK Often, gate programs, which actually I was in a gate program. You start talking to people, you'll find out a lot of people were in these. They were called gifted and talented programs, and they were used to recruit children for 3-letter agencies. And they started in the 60s.
And you were in one?
Well, for a couple of years when I was in junior high.
What was that like?
Well, I can tell you some interesting things about it.
Yeah?
They were using mind control techniques on the children. And you have to understand, these were gifted children. They were picked out of my whole school system to go into a special program.
Right.
And we were, I don't remember that much of it. You have to understand, this was 1963. Okay.
Sure. No problem.
I was a little girl then. You know?
And what are the classes called again? Gate?
They called them gifted and talented. And I was just in a very early gifted and talented program. They were designed by a gentleman named Louis Terman. There's a lot of information. No one's really written a whole definitive book about gate programs, but we were told to sit in front of a television screen, and we were just watching these weird patterns. And I think the teacher was like reading stuff to us to try to imprint on us. I don't know if you've ever heard of Zener cards, which are ESP cards. And some of them have squiggles, some of them have diamonds. I had no idea what this was until I started doing research. But to this day, I still doodle the Zener cards. I'm not kidding. You give me a pen and I start doodling. This was so heavily imprinted on me. One of the girls that I talked to and other people have said that the children in these programs could have been given some type of liquid, like mini dosing of some type.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, I don't remember a lot about it. I'm just saying that this was part of the milieu of the era. And we could go into that more in depth another time. Sure. And, back to my list, Michael Aquino and the Temple of Set. And then there was the book Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
Yes, I have that book.
By McGowan, and he describes military connections of many famous musicians. And then there was also a dangerous time. It was a dangerous time because there were California serial killers, including Zodiac Killer, Golden State Killer, Night Stalker, and a lot more. So the late 60s and 70s, it was a time of great rapid social change, and especially for women who were just entering the workforce in great numbers, and they just weren't always treated that well. So, I mean, I'm kind of at the end here, unless there's a few more things I could go into. The story of Jackie Fox, who was from the band The Runaways. I don't know if you want me to tell you about that just a little bit.
Yeah. Let's talk about that before we wrap up. Sure.
This is, that and a couple other things, and I can wrap it up. Sure.
Absolutely. Take your time.
So Jackie Fox, and there was absolutely no relationship between me, right, calling my main character Jackie, and her story, which I didn't even know about at the time when I was writing. I didn't find out about until much later. But she was in the band The Runaways, and she was 16 years old in July. When she was 16 years old, this happened in 1975, 76 on New Year's Eve. She's now an entertainment attorney. She goes by her real name, which is Jackie Fuchs. And in July 2015, she finally revealed that the Runaways manager, Kim Fowley, sexually assaulted her on the New Year's Eve of 1975 at a party following a Runaways performance in California. She's only 16. She was drugged by a roadie, and while incapacitated, assaulted in front of everybody, including her band members. It was an open secret denied by Joan Jett, Cherry Curry, and Sandy West. And there was a documentary film called Look Away that was released about this, a British documentary in 2021. And, sadly, this was her story. She did leave the Runaways, obviously, right after this happened. And she went on to have a happy, successful life. Like I said, she's a well-known entertainment attorney. Probably by now she's somewhat close to retired. But, and like I said, any relationship between the names is purely coincidental. But it just goes to show, that women were not treated correctly. And before the times of social media and so forth, it was a lot easier to get away with things. Of course, like I said, my tagline, it didn't start with Diddy. So it's not that it doesn't continue to this day, but it's still a lot harder for people to get away with nefarious activities than it used to be. And then just a couple more mentions. Writers are asked to find books that are similar to their book when I'm promoting my book and so forth. And the closest match to Top 40 Honeypot, and I sent you a picture of this. I don't know if you want to try to pull it up. Was the 2016 HBO one-season story called Vinyl. And it was produced by Martin Scorsese, among others. Mick Jagger was involved in the production. And it's the story of a record company founder set in the backdrop of 1970s New York, quote, awash in sex and drugs. And when I saw the first picture, there it is, there's the picture. When I saw that picture, I did a double take. See the gal with the pink shirt and the curly hair and the belt? Like that was me, except for not quite as pretty because I'm not a famous, beautiful Hollywood actress.
Oh, come on now.
But, and I didn't have all that great makeup either back then. But, I mean, that's what everybody looked like, including, like, the women that were working in the radio stations and all the guys, although the DJs were a little bit as we used to say, grungier back then.
Okay.
But
So
I
did
saw that. I was like, that was it. I mean, I even had a little top that was almost exact similar to that. So
really? So they nailed it pretty good.
yeah, they really did. And it's fun to watch. It didn't get a second season, sadly, but
No, I remember that it. I remember when it came out, and it had a lot of potential, but yeah, it didn't get picked up for a second season, I guess.
so the way I ended the book was, it was a tough call. How am I going to end all this? And the ending was 25 years later. It was the year 2000, and it's kind of like an epilogue. And the second to last chapter says, we all got away with it. And then I go through all the stories of the DJs and who's alive and who's passed on and who's doing what and who's still in radio and who's gone on to something else. But then and none of the men who were guilty, none of them were ever held accountable to their wrongdoings. And I left the story open at the very end when my main character, Donnie, has a personal dilemma that suggests what goes around comes around. So that's kind of how I ended it. I kind of left it open. I don't know if I ever really want to do a follow-up because I kind of hate my character so much. Wait, did I say that out loud? When you live with these characters in your head for so many years, it's like, oh, okay, time to bury them. But
yeah.
Anyway, it does leave it open because at the end, my main character, Donnie Dixon, his daughter, who was supposed to call in, doesn't call in, and we don't know where she is. So that's kind of how I end it. And the other thing I do want to mention, thanks to my husband and my family and my friends and my editors for all their support, and also to my mentor, Christopher Loring Knowles of The Secret Sun, who I'm an OG Secret Sunner, original, and he's been a great, I call it a professional friend because we've only actually met once in real life. But he's a social critic and an intellectual, and he's really influenced my work. And he really explains a lot of the topics and themes I've researched and explored. And I just want to say I'm grateful for his help and support. So, and he also did a podcast with me, which I really appreciated. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So hopefully we didn't go over too far. That's pretty much all the info.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much for your time. I recommend people to definitely go check out the book.
Yeah, it's available in all the normal places such as Amazon, and I do have it on Kindle and an audio book, and I think you can get it from Barnes and Noble. I'm sure you can get it from Barnes and Noble as well. So
perfect. Is there anything else you want to share with the listeners, where to find you or any other your other books or anything like that?
Well, I don't have anything right now to promote. As an author, I always have something I'm working on, but nothing right now to talk about. I'm pretty active on X, and that's about it. I think that's enough. It's it's nerve-wracking enough to be active on X. I'm also, besides the other things that I'm doing, I do social media for a nonprofit, so I'm always on social media. I make jokes about it, but it's fun. It's very, it really draws me in. And like I said, I spend a lot of time trying to learn more about all these topics, and just, looking forward to selling as many books as I can. Of course, my dream would be one day this book is made into a movie of some type. And the way I wrote it, a lot of people say, oh, yeah, that should be a movie. But it's not. It's written to be very easy to read, a fast read. You can just sit down and read it in a weekend. It's not. It's a lot of dialogue. It's not written like a movie script per se, but it doesn't have a lot of flowery language or descriptions. Hopefully I did describe the people enough so that you get an idea in your mind what they look like. But it's by no means literary fiction. It's just a fast-paced, fun bit of fiction.
Gotcha. Well, again, I do want to thank you very much for your time. I'm enjoying the book very much. I do recommend people. I recommend that they go check check it out. Yeah, it's interesting that you, like you mentioned before, you were able to, kind of touch the surface of so many different topics. And it's interesting how they all,
mesh together
around the music and, music and radio industries, right?
Right.
So yeah, really cool stuff. So
Thank you.
Janet, again, thank you so much for your time. We'll have to get you back to talk about something else.
Good.
Yeah, that'd be great. So thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone listening and watching. Please subscribe to the Divulgence podcast. Make sure to check us out tomorrow. We have an awesome episode with Scott Horton, and Saturday with William Ramsey. So thank you, everyone. And
oh my goodness, William Ramsey.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
Yeah, he's a good friend, and he's one of my favorites. So so that's it, everyone. Enjoy yourself, and make sure to stay safe. Thank you.